everyone, and welcome back to my second video on immigration law history in the United States. I left you off at the end of the 1800s. At the end of the late 1800s, we found ourselves in the midst of an economic depression, and contrary to the American consciousness, who like to remember the only depression occurred in the 1930s, we have actually had more than just one in our history. We've actually had several. But as usual, when there's an economic downturn, the personas that be, the powers that be, look for a scapegoat. And at the end of the 1800s, that after the 14th Amendment was passed, those who were not in accordance with the 14th Amendment found their scapegoats in the Chinese who had immigrated to the United States, like many immigrants before them and after them. And there was a gentleman who was the child of Chinese parents. He had been on a trip overseas with his parents, and he came back home, and he was denied entry. Even though he had all his paperwork with him, he was denied entry. This was before the enactment of the laws that would eventually develop the departments that we now know as the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Citizenship, Immigration, and Immigration Services, and prior to that, INS, Immigration and Naturalization. Back then, there were just customs officers, and they pretty much made up the law as they went along, as far as who they allowed in and who they didn't, which is why in the last video, as I explained, it wasn't until the 1960s that law as we know it now, a little bit, started to get more and more formulated. But back then, this little known gentleman named Wong Kim Ark was trying to get home, and he was denied entry. And his was the test case that tested the 14th Amendment regarding birthright citizenship. We are a country, rule of law country, where we follow a supreme law of the land, which is called the Constitution. And in that is the 14th Amendment, ratified by the states after passing a supermajority of Congress. The 14th Amendment says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state of which they reside in. For the Chinese in the United States of this era, they were here developing what we now know as the United States. They were here building our railroads. They were here for the gold rush in the West. They farmed the valleys of Northern California, and they were welcome for the most part in America, and they streamlined into the United States until the end of the 1800s, when they were faced with signs of the Chinese must go. Mr. Ark did eventually win his case before the Supreme Court, and it was that case where they weren't known as anchor babies then, as they're being vilified nowadays in campaign rhetoric. They were known as citizens by accident of birth. But we are a country where we follow the Latin term jus solis, not jus sanguine. Jus solis meaning of the soul, of the soil, and jus sanguine meaning of the blood. We allow birthright citizenship, which is our law as per the 14th Amendment, not birth by blood, as in other countries. For example, there are generations and generations of Koreans who were born in Japan but can never become Japanese citizens because Japan is a country where they follow jus sanguine. Please remember that in the coming months, there's going to be a lot more hate mongering regarding immigrants and the poor chumps, as he was called in that Supreme Court case, like Mr. Ark, who are citizens of the United States, whether by accident or on purpose or by whatever circumstances they're born here, they're U.S. citizens. Mr. Ark eventually went to China, and he retired there and never returned to the United States. So much so that his great-granddaughter did not know that her grandfather was the father of birthright citizenship until she was studying it later on. And when asked about it in 1998, she said that she didn't know, and that when he was asked prior to his death, he said he didn't tell anyone because he really didn't think it was that important. He was just a regular guy thinking that he was doing what was right, which was fighting for his birthright as a U.S. citizen. So that leaves us at the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, and in my next video I will begin from there. Thank you for watching and supporting. Bye-bye.